I'm going to comment directly overall thrust of the CFE, but also looking at the overall model, economic growth model of Singapore, which we said was state-directed, foreign investment-led, export-oriented, also growth-focused, top-down. And the CFE, like all the previous strategic plans, is doing the same thing. And the previous strategic plans, which I actually read when they came out, was 1991 Strategic Economic Plan, 1997 Committee for Singapore Competitiveness, 2003 Economic Review Committee, and 2010. The solutions proposed are exactly the same. One, whether you call it upgrading or innovation or productivity increase. Two, focus on entrepreneurs, and more recently on SMEs. And three, internationalization. Okay, so those are the three policies. What the CFE doesn't do is does not address the question of why all the previous plans and committees did not succeed in creating a self-sustaining economic model, and why you're continuing with more of the same. I mean, essentially, if you'll be reading this, they say the same thing in different words. And why do we have to keep doing something that 20 years ago we said we were going to do, and somehow it never became self-generating, self-sustaining economic growth. So that's the overall picture. The state-directed, foreign investment-led, export-oriented economic model focused on upgrading, entrepreneurship, internationalization in its rhetoric hasn't changed. That's the main point. The second point is that changes in the global environment more recently have made the model unviable. Probably since the global financial crisis, very clear that that model is unviable. Why? Long before Trump, the multinational-led model is tapering out. Why? Because multinationals have been changing their strategies in line with shifting comparative advantage and competitive advantage. Some of these trends, which I can get into more, include reshoring versus offshoring, returning industry back to. Basically, the strategy is changed to produce where you sell. If you produce where you sell, this gives an advantage to big economies, because that's where they buy. And Singapore, as we know, lacks scale. Trump has just exacerbated this, that's all. But actually, this has been going on for a while, which is why so many of the US companies have been able to say, oh, we're doing what he said, because actually we already planned to do this for quite a while. And he's also put the rhetoric of our jobs, okay, for our market on top of this. So number one, multinationals have already been consolidating in fewer locations. Those would tend to be big locations, and those would be final consumption locations. Secondly, as we know, prospects for export-oriented growth to rich countries has been declining because distant rich countries are aging and slowing. Their growth is slowing, so it's one thing to grow when the rich world is growing at 3 or 4%. It's another thing when they're growing at 1.5%, and they are aging. The increase in protectionism has been going on for a while. Trump might elevate that. So what is Singapore's competitiveness based on? It is based a lot on tax advantages for multinationals and currency management. I wouldn't say manipulation. Currency management, both of which are increasingly disallowed by international rules and norms. For example, in the last 5-10 years, you have all these OECD base erosion stuff. You have the whole Ireland. Ireland used to be called the Singapore of Europe. They copied us. We didn't copy them. And they are being targeted, so is Luxembourg and all these other countries. You know from our newspapers, Singapore is not a tax haven.
You wouldn't use the term tax haven.
No, we're not a tax haven, sorry. Yeah, it's not allowed. Yeah.
But actually it is, right?
I don't know. The point is that all these things that we've been doing for a long time, there are lists of tax havens which Singapore and Hong Kong appear as grey, not black. Okay, but we're not white, and we've been trying to move away from that. Why is this an issue? This is an issue in Europe and America because essentially the tax breaks are given to companies, and the people suffer the opportunity cost of having lower tax revenues. Okay, so that's one of the issues. So in all this tax reform that has been going on, to which Singapore is a party, the goal has been to shift towards, I guess they call it territorial tax systems. That is, you pay tax on the money that's actually made there. Okay? Which means that if not much money is made there because and basically all your money comes in, and goes out, then it's not going to be, we're not going to get a lot of the tax revenues. On the currency management, which is linked to what Jagun said, the very significant thing about Singapore's so-called budget surplus is that it feeds into the current account surplus, right? So current account is trade in goods and services. Singapore has the world's largest current account surplus, meaning the excess of exports over imports of goods and services has amounted to between 20 and 30% of GDP for 30 over years, right? That means we have been accumulating foreign exchange for over 30 over years. That comes about basically by suppressing domestic consumption. So basically you produce a lot more than you consume. Singapore and China are the two economies which have the lowest share of consumption and wages in GDP, about 35 to 40%. Nobody has, even Korea is like 52, 54%, US is 70, 75%. In other words, when you look at your per capita output, actually less than about a third of it is actually consumed by Singaporeans, meaning that Singaporeans are poorer, 50% poorer than they look by per capita income. As you know, our per capita income is 60-something thousand US dollars a year, meaning a family of 4 would be making about 240 thousand US dollars a year, or about 300 to 400,000 Sing dollars a year would be the average family income, which we clearly know is not the case. But that's what the statistics tell you. That's why we're one of the top 10 richest countries in the world, but not in terms of consumption, wages, or welfare. Why? Because we also have the largest, it's called gross operating surplus on a macroeconomic level. About 52% of our economy is essentially profit, and because we're multinational led, it's essentially foreign profits for foreigners. But back to the current account surplus. We know that Trump has it in his head for a long time. For the last 3 US presidents have accused China of currency manipulation, meaning that China, basically when you're exporting more than you import, there's strong demand for your currency. So your currency should go up. And when your currency goes up, you export less because your goods become more expensive, and you import more because your dollar goes so far overseas, and that's how it self-corrects. The balance self-corrects. So when you don't self-correct, when you're constantly exporting more than you're importing, the price is not adjusting. And the price is not adjusting because of government management of the currency. Trump is simply saying the same thing that US presidents have said before, except he's saying at a time when China is not manipulating its currency in that way. Okay, so he's like not very strong. One of the thoughts that is suggestions, because you don't want US, you don't really want to like attack China if you can help it. So there's been a theory floating around that to avoid looking as if US is targeting China for currency manipulation, it would be global. So if any country that manipulates its currency, we go, happens China is the biggest, okay? But let's say that 20, 30 countries, Korea and Taiwan are already in that mix, and of course Singapore. If you did it by percent, why do you think a country's currency is manipulated, meaning it's undervalued to make itself artificially cheap compared to others? Then it would be the current account surplus, global current account surplus, which is by far, Singapore's by far, probably like 10 times bigger than number 2, which is probably Taiwan. So we're like just out there. So if that happens, which it may not, we would be like the number 1 target, even though we're very small. What helps us in that regard is that we also happen to have a trade deficit with the US, very rare. Okay, so we happen to be one of few countries which just on a bilateral basis, we buy more from the US than we sell. And that's why in all the Treasury Department or IMF rankings of manipulated currencies, we don't appear because we don't meet that particular criteria. Of bilateral surplus with the US, bilateral deficit, surplus with the US because we have a deficit with the US, but we have a huge global surplus, which is where we get all the funds for our sovereign wealth funds. So there is some risk there that Singapore will be like the number one currency manipulator or whatever. The third thing is state direction of the economy. This is the same, increasingly WTO and now probably the US. State direction meaning the state gives you subsidies, tax breaks, basically all our economic plans. The state does all these things to make it attractive for mainly foreign investors to come in. And that is increasingly disallowed by WTO and so on, or imitated. So if we want to give tax rates to companies, so can the state of Indiana, which it did, to allure the company. Because basically that's what we've done. Since there's nothing here that a multinational company would want, no market, no talent, no labor, no technology, right? Why would you come? Yeah, and you come, essentially, there's a lot of tax. I've been on the board of 2 multinational companies.
We have a very favorable government.
Okay, but the thing is, anybody can do that now, right? So for example, the US tax rate, everyone knows is the highest in the world, 35%. It's not because the US did anything. It's been 35% for 30 years. Everybody else cut their rate. So if everybody else cut your rate, you end up being the most expensive. So everybody's doing the same thing. Everybody's offering the same tax breaks. If you had to choose between Indiana and Singapore with the same tax rate, of course you go to Indiana. Because you got land, you got labor, you got talent, you got market. So you don't need any kind of Trump tariff barrier, actually. But that's obviously getting worse. Chinese state-owned enterprises have been targeted and will definitely be targeted because they subsidize. So that's one reason why the policies of the past cannot continue. They're either imitated and so they become ineffective, or they become disallowed and make you give other people a rationale to keep out your stuff because you're practicing unfair competition. The second reason why state direction cannot continue is because bureaucrats have no visibility in the age of technological disruption when you're at the frontier. Okay, so Chapman already said they didn't talk about IoT and stuff like that. Singapore's industrial policy succeeded for a long time because we were climbing the ladder. When you climb a ladder, it's very easy because you just look at the next rung. You figure out how to get there, and everybody has done that, including Korea, Taiwan, Mexico. Everyone who does that makes it to the top. There's nothing special about us. The problem is when you're at the top, you have no visibility. There's no ladder rung up there. There's no one who's done it before. If the private markets have no visibility, the private markets in the US have no visibility. There's no reason why a Singapore civil servant would. If they did, we all can retire because they would have invested their money correctly around the world and we can live off the things. So the reason we leave things to the market when you're up there is because it's so risky, it's so uncertain, you do not want to put your people's money in it. You don't want to put public's money. Individual investors can go and risk everything and lose everything. We don't care because it's just some particular investor. But you can't put public money when it's totally uncertain. It's not as if we haven't had errors in industrial policy before, and one can mention life sciences among other things. The CFE, very cleverly, unlike the previous ones, backs away from this a little bit. You have to read all the words. It is much more vague, much more general, and people criticize it for that. This Singaporean mindset is such a, they didn't say, but the reason they say is because they cannot deliver. And they have to protect themselves by saying, we cannot. They have all these sort of what Americans call motherhood and apple pie statements like, embrace technology. Who is not going to embrace technology? Digitization is already going on. The policy is still full of contradictions. For example, the main one, every day you see, government will help SMEs go international. Since when are governments the source of SME private entrepreneurship? It's a contradiction in terms. This is the bureaucratization of entrepreneurship. Maybe that's the reason this has never succeeded. Why would some civil servant who has never risked her own money or her own job in the marketplace in Indonesia be able to tell some entrepreneur, SME, what to do and how to do it. Just absolutely doesn't make sense. Okay, I've never understood why they didn't. So basically, they're throwing a lot of money at things the market is not supporting and which may not work, which they are actually acknowledging. Okay, why?
Let's say you have $1 billion.
Yeah.
Instead of buying a building in Seoul,
Yeah.
you can lend, not via Hong Kong Finance and so on, but lend to 1,000 entrepreneurs.
I
1
agree.
million each.
I agree. That could certainly have been done even long ago. You know, we have spent billions of dollars subsidizing foreign companies' profits when we could have taken a risk, which then left, the companies then left, which we could have taken the risk on 1,000 small entrepreneurs. If 700 of them fail, we're still ahead of the game, because they stay. Sort of a philosophical argument. Whenever government throws a lot of money at things, you know the market is not going to do it. And the market's not going to do it because it's economically irrational and people are going to lose money. So essentially you're subsidizing the private market. This is another thing that bugs me about Singaporeans. They like to see government throwing money at something. But government throwing money means the market has failed. Listen to the market. Why won't I put my private money in there? Oh, because there's some government that's willing to put it in there, much better, take more risk, much more uncertainty. Okay, so I think we need to change a lot of our mindset.
Comfort Delgro
Yeah.
doesn't invest in its own version of Uber and Grab,
Yeah.
whereas it already had one in the number 65221111.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
a year or two ago, Protect put $10 or $20 million to Anthony Tan of
Yeah.
Grab.
Yeah.
So whereas we believe
Well, people
a
say, people say
enterprise could
Uber should
a-
have been invented in Singapore.
Yeah,
I mean, it should have been, right? I mean, it's like, but it wasn't. Because we are a follower model, when you're at the top, you really cannot follow anymore. So several things that are in there. One, in CFE and all the previous ones, Singaporeans are not entrepreneurial. That's why we need government to push them to be entrepreneurial, okay? Which really hasn't happened anywhere. I mean, like, why would so? I think we need to ask the question, one, is it true that we are not entrepreneurial? And if it's so, why are we not entrepreneurial? I'm sure you all, like me, have met lots and lots of Singapore entrepreneurs. And as I said at the IPS conference like 2 years ago, 10 years ago, I was in Myanmar, which I've been visiting for 30 years, Burma. There were 350 Singaporean businesses there. This is way before Burma opened up, way before IE went there. And the reason I interviewed someone, the reason I knew about it was that my massage therapist in Singapore had set up a spa there in Traders Hotel, She had all the, whatever you think about them, generals' wives and everything going to her. She, I think, is now an Uber driver. Why? First of all, chased out of Orchard Road by rentals. So had to rent in some area which Orchard Road type clients will not go to. Okay, but long ago, 10 years ago, she'd already gone there. She's not unusual. So I interviewed some of them. Most of them got no degree, maybe not even school. Okay, as I also said like 2 years ago, this is like 20 over years ago, I was in Tonga, in the South Pacific. I'm very kiasu, right? So I always have to go to the airport early and be first in line. And the one time, it's like almost only time, got up, my whole family early, got to the airport, in the line in front of me was a guy with a red passport. And he told me, one of 10 Singaporeans who made the rounds of all the Pacific Islands selling instant noodles, okay, ramen noodles. I mean, they already knew each other. They have to do that to survive. The entire South Pacific has maybe 1 million people. I mean, like, it's not, but they're basically pushed out. So that's one thing. I'm not sure that Singaporeans are not entrepreneurial. I think it's how we define entrepreneurs. If we want to define them only as tech entrepreneurs, called technopreneurs. Remember technopreneurs? You just Google technopreneurs, Singapore 2003. What happened to them? Second question is innovation. Singapore likes to tout the fact that it's at the top of all these innovation rankings. Well, if you look closely, as has been pointed out by this INSEAD study, among others, Singapore is top of innovation rankings only because of input, not on output. Okay, so if you look at it, we spend if you think how much money you actually put into innovation schemes, number one, okay, prorated by population. If you look at output, How much came out of that? Number 20-something. Okay? If you look at, I think the India people have a metric called innovation efficiency, 110 out of 150 countries. Okay? So we're very good at throwing money at things. Where does the money go? Oh, we need a lot of civil servants to give out the money, to evaluate it. Oh, we need a lot of consultants, mostly foreign consulting firms, to come and do evaluation studies for us. Oh, we need to give all this money to foreign companies. Putting more money in isn't the metric. What we want to see is how much you can get for how little you put in. Final thing is government the solution or is government the problem? Okay, a lot of what Shek-Wen said is this term which economists use called crowding out. It usually refers to when governments run a big budget deficit, they have to borrow from citizens to pay for the budget deficit by issuing bonds. Therefore, they raise interest rates, and when they raise interest rates, the private market cannot afford and gets crowded out. The idea is that in a full employment economy, okay, government can expand only if the private sector shrinks. Okay, so that's just crowding out. We have this high proportion of our university graduates, if that's how you define talent, go into the civil service. In fact, all the top ones do, because that's how you get your scholarship. So the private sector has been crowded out because why wouldn't you go and get an overseas scholarship worth $500,000 US and then come back to a high-paid job for the rest of your life? So the top, whatever percentage, 0.1 or whatever, gets crowded out. Even the talent is all gone. And I have a lot of real examples of this. I have at least 2 former scholars, and they're unusual because scholars usually, apparently, government scholars don't do MBA, but these 2 did. After they've almost finished their bond, they came to do MBA, and then they both went into multinationals, worked overseas, went to the private sector, came back to Singapore, and went into A-Star, okay? And NTUC. They discovered, one of them while living in Beijing, that the same year scholars that didn't leave and go into the private sector were doing so much better. Like, making a lot more money than you, working for US multinational in China, have car and driver, whereas you got to take taxis a long time ago. So the crowding out, particularly when salaries rose at the high end of the civil service, definitely dragged some people into that. I just want to end with one thing. So one of the things I do at Michigan is I teach executive programs, in particular for Chinese banks. One big bank is ICBC, the world's largest bank. We have a 10-year contract with them. They're 7% owned by Temasek, by the way. Anyway, so they come to Michigan, to Ann Arbor, my town, and they spend 6 to 9 months there, each group. The one that I actually run, and I'm the director of, and I teach for 2 weeks, is a program by the China Development Bank, which is a state-owned bank, they asked for it, called Industrial Upgrading and Financial Innovation. So Chinese come, and because they are at that stage, right, because they need to move to the next level. They're not at the top of the ladder. They want to know what other Asian countries have done, what the Europeans have done, and so on. I learned a lot from that about the Chinese mindset, one of which is they also have difficulty trusting private entrepreneurs, partly because that group is a group that historically provides a challenge to you, to your political authority, but also because they're so state-centered, they actually don't understand entrepreneurs and private entrepreneurs. One of the things which showed this was they're very fascinated with the US. How come the US is so advanced? And it turns out invents Google, Apple, everything. We know they're supposed to have been declining, according to Kishore Mahbubani, for 30 years, right? The West is dead, that's what Kishore says. How come they turn out all these things? And it's very interesting. The Chinese believe, at least the first group that I had, believed that there was a secret US industrial policy that's so sophisticated that we don't know about it, and I don't know about it, right? They absolutely don't know about it. And the second time I did it, they gave us actually a document from Obama administration, which I had never heard of, and they said, we want to learn about this. The document was some White House committee that had talked about technology and innovation. So I read it dutifully and regurgitated it because they asked for it. It's really viscerally difficult for them to see a role for private entrepreneurs. But most important, and this is where I end, on the last day when I did the wrap-up of the first group that I saw, they were summary and wrap-up, and they had done some group work. Then this guy stood up and said, I agree with everything you said, but you left out the most important thing. And he said, we must be brave enough to challenge authority. This was November 20th, 2015. He was a banker. It was a time when the Chinese government was arresting everybody in the financial markets in Shanghai, even some business professors, accusing them of manipulating the market. That was, I thought, like very brave. Second thing was, the head HR guy who was the head of the Communist Party of the Chinese Development Bank was in the room disguised as the head HR guy. He was, so this guy, in front of, the Communist Party head, at a time when his friends are being arrested, said they must be brave enough to challenge authority. And then he told the story. Why was he like that? Well, he had spent 3 years in New York as a banker. And as he said, his son, went to preschool in New York, got accustomed to asking questions, went back to Beijing, went to the top preschool in Beijing. Teachers hated the son. At the end of 1 year, the teacher said the greatest achievement of the year was to stop his son from asking questions. Because he said 2/3 of the questions were asked by his son, who was then 4 years old. So he was very angry. He said, what makes you the top preschool in Beijing? And they said, the number of our students who go to Beida, Fudan, and Tsinghua in 14 years' time. Right? And he mentioned that as just an example of why China is behind. And I think there are some things in that story which suggest to us why Singapore is behind, perhaps where we should and could be.